My wife will be gone by tomorrow.
During our honeymoon, I woke up in the middle of the night to overhear my husband secretly having a terrifying conversation on the phone. Trembling with fear, I dared to peek into his smartphone to find out what he was talking about. What I found was beyond belief. Knowing of my husband's plan, I took his passport and flew back to the States on my own. As I was planning to utterly destroy him, someone suddenly approached me. My name is Karen. I'm just an ordinary office worker in New York. I met my husband, Brian, through mutual friends. We hit it off after a few dinners out, and after dating for a year, we just recently got married. Brian is handsome and has a really kind personality, but there was one major problem. This happened one day just before our wedding. I'm home. Normally, Brian gets home from work later than I do, but on this day, I had to work late, so I got home after him. As I walked in and was about to take off my shoes, I noticed something odd.
Were these shoes always here?
There were not only Brian's work shoes, but also a pair of women's heels. Could he be cheating? I thought. Listening carefully, I could hear muffled voices. It was a man and a woman talking, and I immediately recognized Brian's voice. I couldn't make out the entire conversation, but I could hear a woman's voice laughing along. In the spur of the moment, I started recording with my smartphone and burst into the living room. Huh? There was Brian and my mother-in-law. Oh, welcome back. Karen, welcome home. Sorry for intruding. Relieved that it wasn't an affair, the living room scene was still quite bizarre. Boxes were piled up everywhere. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes?" Brian responded, "Oh, these? We're moving." My mom came over to help pack. I was so confused I felt like my brain might explode. Moving? Where to? I never heard about this. Oh, Brian. You didn't tell Karen? Sorry, I've been so busy with work. I'm so sorry, Karen. I told him if you're gonna get married, you should move into our house. It looks like Brian didn't mention it to you. Live in her house? I was more confused than ever. I was looking forward to starting our newlywed life together, just the two of us. This is a huge deal. I have to put a stop to this. So, I said, I haven't been told anything about this. I can't just agree to something decided without me. But then they said, it's normal for newlyweds to live with their in-laws, you know? If you can't, maybe you should reconsider the marriage. Mom's right. Plus, I'm used to my house. It'll be easier for you too if anything happens. Two birds with one stone, right? With my mother-in-law present, I couldn't argue with Brian, and it was decided that we'd move into his parents' home. Turns out, Brian is very much a mama's boy. In retrospect, had I been more assertive back then, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. Living with my in-laws was incredibly tough for me. Ever since we started living at my husband's parents' house, his mama's boy tendencies accelerated. The first person he'd ask for anything was always Mom. While my mother-in-law took care of most of the cooking and household chores, the rare times I made dinner he would say, "My mom's cooking tastes better." Perhaps my mother-in-law enjoyed being relied on by her son because she did everything for him. My father-in-law would just turn a blind eye to this behavior and not only ignored me but wouldn't even look at me. Sometimes, when I tried talking to him, he'd just brush me off. I constantly questioned my place in the household. The biggest concern for me was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. After moving in, I realized she adored branded clothes and bags. Every time her favorite brands released something new, she'd buy it. Every release, she'd approach me saying, "Karen, I really want this, but I'm a bit short on cash right now. Could you maybe lend me a little?" Even though I thought she shouldn't buy it if she couldn't afford it, since she did all the cooking and cleaning, I couldn't object and just gave her the money as asked. Thanks to this, the savings I had accumulated since my college days were nearly gone. When I tried discussing this with my husband, he just said, "We're living here rent-free, so don't complain. It's not like I chose to live here." Still, the reason I didn't leave was that my husband, for all his faults, genuinely cared for me. Whenever we both had a day off, he'd take me out on dates, and he had even planned our honeymoon. Living with the in-laws was tough, but I kept going, holding on to the hope in his kindness. Finally, the day of our honeymoon that my husband planned arrived. Our destination was Italy. It was a dream come true for me, as I always wanted to try authentic Italian cuisine. The thought of traveling abroad with the love of my life made me so excited. However, my excitement for the honeymoon turned into a nightmare due to one thing my husband said. It happened late at night. I woke up wanting to go to the bathroom and noticed my husband wasn't next to me. Assuming he was also in the restroom, I approached and heard him speaking on the phone. Who could he be talking to at this hour? Listening closer, I heard some shocking words.
My wife's gonna be gone tomorrow.
What?
Don't worry, Mom. I've got it all planned. I'll get back to you.
It seemed he was talking to my mother-in-law. But what did he mean by gonna be gone? Fearful, I quickly returned to bed and pretended to be asleep. After a while, my husband came back to bed and soon began snoring. Making sure he was asleep, I stealthily took his smartphone and headed to the bathroom. Luckily, he didn't have a password on it. As wrong as it felt, given the circumstances, I had to look. Opening his messages, I found a terrifying plan detailed in the chats with his mother. They were scheming to take my life for the insurance money, which my mother-in-law intended to spend on branded items. The fear was overwhelming. I couldn't believe that my husband, who had always been kind to me, was plotting this with his mother. I took photos of their conversation with my own phone and returned to bed. The rest of the night, I was too frightened to sleep. As dawn broke and transport services started operating, I realized I needed to leave for my safety. Gathering only my belongings, I decided to leave the hotel on my own. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted my husband's passport on the desk. A good idea just hit me. I took my husband Brian's passport and left the room, in an attempt to strand him abroad. I then headed to the airport, boarded the plane, and returned to New York ahead of him. Throughout that time, Brian kept calling me relentlessly, but I ignored all his calls. Once back in New York, I began preparing to take revenge on my husband and his mother. Since I was living with his parents, I couldn't return home. So, I based myself in a relatively cheap hotel in the city, gathering more evidence and contacting lawyers. I also made occasional visits to our house when his parents were out, sneaking out some of my belongings bit by bit. Brian continued to reach out, but I kept ignoring him. A few days of such life passed, and I was at his parents' house fetching my belongings. His mother, Karen, was at her knitting class, and his father was out golfing. I figured they wouldn't be back for at least 2 hours. As I was packing, I suddenly heard, "Huh? Karen?" I turned around to find my father-in-law standing there. This wasn't good. Brian and I were supposed to be on our honeymoon in Italy until today. "What are you doing here? Weren't you two supposed to be on your honeymoon?" What should I do? What excuse could I possibly give? Should I be honest about why I returned to New York alone? But what if my father-in-law was in on whatever scheme Brian was planning? These thoughts raced in my mind. Seeing my confusion, he said, "It might be better to talk over a coffee. How about we go to a nearby diner?" Not wanting to be there when my mother-in-law returns, I agreed to his suggestion. Once we sat at the diner, he quickly asked, "So, why are you here when you should be abroad? What happened to Brian?" I was hesitant to tell the truth. If he was in on the plan with her and Brian, everything I had worked on would be ruined. "Didn't your wife tell you anything?" I asked, trying to gauge his knowledge. Looking puzzled, he responded, "I haven't heard a thing." His reaction suggested that he genuinely didn't know anything. Believing him, I decided to lay out everything to him. "Are you aware of this plan?" I then showed him the printed messages exchanged between Brian and my mother-in-law. His face was one of sheer shock. "No way! I've seen them whispering together a few times, but I never thought they were plotting something like this." It seemed like my father-in-law really didn't know. Yes, when I was over there, I overheard my husband talking on the phone with his mom, and that's when I found out. I got scared, so I returned to the US on my own earlier. I'm so sorry. My wife really owes you an apology. Please don't apologize. You haven't done anything wrong. As for the future, I feel terrible asking this of you, but I'm thinking of divorcing Brian. That's completely up to you, Karen. I'm truly sorry, especially since this should have been a happy time as newlyweds. He apologized to me many times. I used to think he was avoiding me, maybe even disliked me, but he spoke to me with such kindness and concern. Despite him being such a good man, I can't fathom how his wife and my husband turned out the way they did. While I was thinking about this, he shared a story with me. Karen, you've been forced to buy branded items for my wife, haven't you? Well, yeah, I have. You know, it might have been my fault. Excuse me? Well, it was shortly after my wife and I got married. I gifted her a designer handbag for her birthday. After that, she became totally obsessed with designer brands. Even at this age, she keeps wearing those expensive brands. I kinda wish she'd dress more age-appropriately. I see. There were times when she'd even go into debt just to buy them. I was pretty mad at her then. I never imagined she'd ask you to buy stuff for her now. I'm really sorry about that. I had no idea that my mother-in-law's obsession with brands had such a backstory. Still, I couldn't forgive her for what she'd done. It's not your fault. She continued her habits even after you got mad at her. She's the one to blame. Right. By the way, how's Brian doing? He was supposed to be back by now, wasn't he? About that. Oh no. I wondered how he'd react knowing that his son was stuck overseas. But I had come this far, I had to tell him everything. Actually, I took Brian's passport with me when I came back to the States. So, he won't be coming back for a while. What? I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but it was the only way to smoothly proceed with the divorce. I see. Well, since you live with us, I guess it's understandable. So, that's what was going on. Did something happen? No, just remembered the day you returned to the US. I overheard Brian talking to my wife on the phone. According to the father-in-law, Brian, for a moment, seemed panicked without me, but he later said that things would work out if I just disappeared. At the time, he had no idea what they were talking about, but now it made sense to him. I understand the situation. If you're okay with it, I'll support you, Karen. Really? Thank you so much. While we were talking, my phone suddenly rang. It was from Brian. Given the time, he probably realized his passport was missing. I finally answered the call. Hello? Oh, Karen. Thank God you answered. Where the heck are you? I've been worried sick. But I'm just glad you're safe. I'm sorry for making you worry. I had an urgent call from my family back home and had to return. Things got so hectic that I couldn't get in touch. I get it. But hey, have you seen my passport? I was gonna return today, but I can't find it. About that, I accidentally took your passport with me when I rushed back. What? So what am I supposed to do? You should be able to get a replacement passport there. It'll probably be faster than me sending it to you. A replacement? What about my job? I can't take any more days off. Don't worry, I'll explain everything to your company. I'll also talk to your parents about it. All right then. I'm sorry. So, that's what's going on. Please be careful when you come back. With that, I hung up the phone. Karen, you sure can spin a tall tale, can't ya? I've always been crafty, that's for sure. Thanks to my father-in-law supporting me, I was able to proceed with the divorce preparations more smoothly. And finally, the day arrived. Brian managed to get his passport reissued and returned to the States. His mom went to the airport to pick him up, so the two of them came back home together. We're home. Man, what an ordeal. Indeed. All because of Karen. After hearing from Brian that I'd returned to the States before him, his mother, apparently upset that their plan failed, started making sarcastic comments towards me. I wanted to snap back at her, but I held my tongue. No worries. They're gonna get what's coming to them soon. As soon as Brian and his mother entered the house, my father-in-law, with a stern look, said, "Both of you, come here." He led them to the living room where I was waiting. "Sit down." Brian and his mother seemed a bit flustered, but they couldn't defy his imposing demeanor, so they sat down obediently. "I apologize for bringing this up as soon as you guys got back, but there's something really important we need to discuss." "Important?" "I'll cut to the chase. Brian, I want a divorce." "Divorce?" "Hold on, Karen. What's this all about? You trap my son in Italy and then demand a divorce when he comes back? There's a limit to being unreasonable." "Unreasonable? Aren't you the unreasonable ones here?" "What do you mean?" "Oh, so you're playing dumb now? Can you explain this then?" Saying this, I showed them pictures of the messages exchanged between Brian and his mother. "What's this?" "These can be easily fabricated these days. This isn't valid proof." "You're right. This might be weak as evidence. But what about this?" I then presented a voice recorder. Pressing the play button, the recording of a phone conversation between Brian and his mother played. My father-in-law had recorded it for me. Since his wife is hard of hearing, she always turns the speaker volume to the max during calls, making it audible throughout the house. My father-in-law took the opportunity to record them. The conversation revealed that since I had safely returned to the US, their scheme had failed. It also included the disappointed voice of my mother-in-law and my husband discussing their next move. "You can't deny this now, can you?" "Wait, Karen. Please reconsider the divorce. I only did what my mom told me to. I never wanted any of this. But she kept saying she needed more money to buy her favorite designer items. I just wanted to see her happy. But now, I see the light. I don't want to divorce you. Let's leave right now and live happily. It's not too late, right?" I was utterly dumbfounded by his words. How on earth could he come up with such a delusional fantasy in his head? "You know, I've always thought this, but you really need to stop with the whole mommy thing. It's super creepy. I get that you want to please her, but trying to get rid of your wife and using the insurance money to buy her fancy stuff? No way I'm staying with someone like that. Just the thought gives me a headache." Brian looked utterly defeated by my words. "In any case, I will definitely be seeking a divorce. Plus, I will also ask for reimbursement for all the designer items you bought with my money." "What? But then I won't be able to buy designer items." Even after all this, she still seems obsessed with designer brands. I'm truly dumbfounded by this mother and son duo. "Enough is enough." Suddenly, my father-in-law interjected. "All you care about is yourselves. Do you realize how terrified Karen has been because of your actions? Are designer items really worth it to you, even if it means using someone else's money? Do you realize how much trouble you've caused her?" The two of them were taken aback by his outburst. Thanks to him speaking up for me, I felt a bit relieved. But my revenge wasn't over yet. "Wait a sec. When did you find out about this?" "On the first night of our honeymoon in Italy. I overheard you talking to your mom in the middle of the night. So, that's why you flew back to New York the next morning. You didn't tell my company about this, did you?" "You're finally catching on? Well, you'll know the answer to that soon enough." Just as I said that, Brian's phone started ringing at the perfect timing. "It's from the company. You gotta be kidding me." Hesitantly, Brian answered. "Hello? What? Fired? No, wait. It's all a misunderstanding." Before he could explain, the call seemed to have been cut off. "Just so you know, I've already provided evidence of this to your company." Having lost both his wife and job, Brian seemed drained of energy and slumped to the floor. So, from now on, let's communicate through my lawyer. And stay out of my life, okay? And just like that, our newlywed life came to an end. The story didn't stop with the divorce. My lawyer, whom I'd been consulting with, told me that even just plotting to kill someone was a crime, so I reported the matter to the police. While they weren't arrested, both of them had to pay a hefty fine. Thanks to having a criminal record, Brian struggled to find a new job, and Karen became the talk of the town. Moreover, to pay for the damages and alimony, almost all of the designer goods Karen had hoarded were sold off. The only thing left was a purse, a birthday gift from her husband. From now on, the household finances will be managed by her husband, and Karen's pocket money would be reduced. Seems like they got a taste of their own medicine. As for me, I'm living alone in a condo in Manhattan. While I did divorce shortly after getting married, I didn't feel lonely at all. Rather, I felt liberated. If possible, I'd never want to live with someone else again. Sure, living alone has its challenges, but not having to constantly be wary of someone else is more than worth it. And no more dealing with Karen's money grubbing. I've started saving bit by bit, hoping that someday, I'd find happiness with someone else. Listen to me, I'm gonna divorce you. Facing my adamant refusal, Jack blurted that out. Next to him, Catherine was saying, "Please take care of us soon." I thought I had been devoted to Jack and Catherine, but apparently, I was mistaken. For them, living together seemed to be the ultimate act of filial piety. I've been turning down the idea of cohabitation for about 5 years, but it seems I've reached my limit. I do as Jack says and pack my things to leave the house. A few days later, I received hundreds of calls from Jack. My name is Natalie. I'll be turning 48 this year. Jack and I have been married for about 20 years. We weren't head over heels in love even when we were dating. Jack seemed indifferent to romance, and I didn't think he was that interested in it. We have one child, but he's already moved out, so it's just Jack and I in the house. Jack has a rather dominating personality, a tad intimidating. But given my laid-back nature, I never really minded his quirks too much. We've been together since high school, and though I hesitated when Jack proposed, I eventually decided to marry him. In the early days of our marriage, I was a stay-at-home wife, taking care of the household and attending to tasks given by my in-laws. After some time, our child was born, and the enthusiastic grandparents would often visit our place. Initially, I was told that living with in-laws was off the table. I wouldn't want to live with my parents always around. It'd be stifling. We're never gonna live with them. I believed those words and decided to marry Jack. However, as our child grew older, out of the blue, Jack proposed living with his parents. Sure, our child became more independent, and in a few years, he'd be off to college. But I was against the idea of living with my in-laws, and I made it clear every time the subject came up. We had several discussions about cohabitating, and I rejected them all. Every time, Jack would become grumpy. Maybe he thought I'd eventually agree? There were mainly 2 reasons why I didn't want to live together. Firstly, I didn't get along with my mother-in-law, Catherine. Shortly after our marriage, I was often summoned to my in-laws' place. Since I wasn't working at that time, I'd always rush over if they needed any assistance. But even when I hurried, Catherine would complain, "You're late. How long do you think I've been waiting? The TV isn't working, please check it." And it wouldn't even be urgent matters. At first, it felt like minor nuisances, but over time her actions escalated. During a family gathering, everyone was served lunch except for me. They had ordered sushi for the day, and there wasn't any for me. So, I had no choice but to eat alone at a nearby diner. As Catherine's blatant acts of hostility increased, I tried discussing it with Jack once. "I think your mom has been giving me a hard time." I was hesitant to talk about it, but can you maybe speak to her? I tried to approach it gently, but Jack took it as criticism. Feeling that I had insulted his mother, he got furious and gave me the cold shoulder for a while. That made it even harder for me to confide in him. From that point on, I felt Jack's attitude towards me changed. He was never the type to help around the house, but he used to assist when I asked. However, after discussing Catherine, he started ignoring even my simplest requests. While I kept refusing the cohabitation, Jack's mood worsened even more. Not only did his demeanor change drastically, but he also began coming home late and even hinted at having an affair. Not only did Jack's attitude change drastically, but he also stopped coming home. Moreover, he even began to make comments hinting at infidelity. "I'm going out for drinks with a lady tonight, so I'll be late," Jack would say, only to return home the next afternoon. This went on for about 4 years. Even if the love is waning, no one can stand being treated like that by their spouse. I became so worn out that even my kids began to worry about me. My friends also started telling me, "You look thin. I mean, more worn out. You should eat properly and get some rest." Although I knew I needed to do something, I couldn't bring myself to act. That's when a friend approached me with a job offer at her flower shop. One of my friends owned the shop and had a vacancy. She thought it might help lift my spirits. When I told Jack and Catherine about my new job, they casually remarked, "It's good you're working. We need to support ourselves." That's true. We could live on Jack's salary, but I'd feel better knowing Natalie has an income, Catherine chimed in. Of course, I planned to contribute to household expenses since I lived with Jack. But that doesn't mean I'm doing it for Jack or Catherine. Working at the flower shop lightened my mood, and people began to say I looked happier. When I was a stay-at-home mom, I felt down dealing with Jack and Catherine all the time. However, interacting with various people at the shop made me realize how much I enjoyed working. This newfound happiness made me less inclined to go home. I'd often lie to Jack about working late, just to avoid seeing him, or go out to dinner with friends. This went on for about a year. About 5 years after we started discussing living together, Jack called me for a talk. He began pointing out that I had been spending a lot of time outside. My spending habits had become reckless since I started working, and I wasn't doing household chores anymore. Then, he stated that someone as lazy as me was not needed in the house. To add insult to injury, he said he would forgive everything if I agreed to move in with him. I firmly refused as usual. But just then, Catherine, probably waiting in the next room, burst in. "Why are you so against moving in? Did I do something wrong?" she smirked. Jack defended her, saying Catherine hadn't done anything and that it was just my bad attitude. I reiterated my decision not to move in with them, but it seemed they didn't get the message. Jack threatened, "You better start listening, or I'm gonna file for divorce." Catherine jumped in, "Please take care of us soon." Though I had endured so much, that day was the last straw. While I kept things calm at the moment, the next day, I decided to pack my things and leave the house. I waited until I was sure Jack was at work to make my move. I couldn't take everything, so I packed only the essentials. Contemplating where to go, I realized my only option was to turn to my parents. When I called them, they were happy to come pick me up. Honestly, I thought my mom would be angry, since she'd previously urged me to get married. However, after explaining the situation, she told me to come back. A few hours after the call, my parents arrived in a large van. Apparently, they had rented a big vehicle just for this. Feeling loved, I decided to move all my belongings out. That night, I received a call from Jack, who probably had finished work. "Hey, I noticed your stuff is gone from the house. You're not actually thinking of getting a divorce, are you?" he said. I let him know that's exactly what I was planning. I pointed out that the business card of a divorce attorney was on the table and told him from now on to communicate through the lawyer. Jack was livid. "Where are you now? Come back. I'll teach you a lesson," he started shouting threats. I've never experienced physical violence from Jack before, but this time, it might be best not to talk to him directly. Caught off guard by the mention of a lawyer, Jack hesitated for a moment but soon started throwing insults again. I could hear Catherine in the background, yelling, "Forget about her. I'll find someone even better for you. If you get divorced now, you can choose from a bunch of girls. Catherine probably doesn't know what's gonna happen to Jack next. However, if she agrees to a divorce in any form, it's convenient for me. Jack started listening to Catherine's words and seemed to be leaning towards the idea of a divorce. And then, he said, "You sure you want to divorce me? You ain't gonna find another good man like me anytime soon," and hung up the phone. After that, there was no contact from Jack or Catherine, and I enjoyed a moment of peace at my parents' house. The flower shop where I work is managed by a friend, and thanks to their consideration, I was allowed to take some time off. At my parents' house, I enjoyed my mom's home-cooked meals and had a drink in the evening with my dad, forgetting the bad stuff. However, I guess Jack got a call from the lawyer because he started calling me angrily again. I told him to communicate through the lawyer, but did he not listen? The reason why Jack kept contacting me was clear. I had gathered evidence that would be beneficial for me during the divorce. For a long time, Jack often hinted at cheating. I was initially shocked, but I had a feeling we might divorce someday, so I recorded conversations just in case. He wasn't actually cheating, but it was true he went out for dinner with another woman. This was confirmed by a local private investigator. With this information alone, it wasn't enough to claim he cheated, but because I had his recorded statements, I could present it as evidence of his affair. Jack was furious about this and kept calling me. I didn't need to be in touch with Jack anymore, but I couldn't help but wonder how he'd react, so I answered the phone. The first thing he blurted out was, "What the heck is this? I haven't cheated on you. Where's the evidence, huh? Is this some kind of fabrication? Cut the crap. Do you enjoy tarnishing my reputation? And you want to claim compensation for the emotional stress I've supposedly caused you? If anything, I should be the one asking." He was shouting at the top of his lungs. He was so loud that his voice distorted and I couldn't hear some parts. Given how aggressive Jack was, I expected he'd be reluctant about the divorce. But a few days later, for some reason, he easily agreed to it. The reason being, Catherine ended up covering the compensation fee. I was surprised that Catherine had that kind of money, but if it meant he'd agree to the divorce, it wasn't an issue. I decided to accept the offer from Jack's side. After consulting with my attorney, we ended up slightly reducing the compensation amount. But it can't be helped. It's common to ask for a bit more initially and then reduce the amount later, to make it easier for the other party to accept. Just when I thought I could finally get the compensation and get divorced, it seems it won't be that easy. Just when the divorce seemed to be finalized, Jack decided to return to his in-laws' place. But when he got there, he found Catherine and her father, Kenneth, fighting. The reason was Catherine's affair. Jack, who happened to be there, got an earful from Kenneth as well. "Are you two kidding me? Even though you have your life partners, you let your hearts be stolen by someone else. I've been patient till now, but I can't take it anymore. Both of you, get out." "No. I haven't cheated on anyone. If you say I have, show me the evidence." Catherine was defiant against Kenneth, but she was speechless when Kenneth showed her the photos. The photos showed Catherine arm in arm with her lover. Catherine had no words when presented with the undeniable evidence. On the other hand, Jack said, "I didn't cheat. This is something Natalie did on her own. The evidence shown is fake. It's a frame-up. There's no need to kick me out too." But Kenneth wasn't hearing any of it. Their argument was so loud, the entire neighborhood could hear it. Or so I heard later from a friend who lived nearby. They say like father, like son, but this seemed too much. Just like me, Kenneth had gathered evidence of Catherine's infidelity. Unlike Jack, Catherine really did cheat. She had been cheating for about 5 years, and Kenneth had noticed a while ago. Once he realized, he hired a private investigator and gathered evidence of her infidelity. Not only did Kenneth have photos of Catherine cheating, but he also had emails with content suggesting an affair. Catherine wasn't good with smartphones and hadn't set a password, so it was possible to gather the emails as evidence. Later, given our similar situations, I had a chance to talk with Kenneth. That's when he showed me the photos he used as evidence. The photos I received from the private investigator were pretty clear and showed evidence of cheating. Just having their arms around each other isn't enough proof, but the content of the texts clearly showed infidelity. From my own experience, I understood how important evidence really is. My lawyer even said, having evidence puts you in a significantly better position. In Natalie's case, there are recordings, so even if there wasn't actual cheating, it proves that the marital relationship has severely broken down. You can definitely get a divorce. The difference between me and Kenneth was whether we were considering divorce. By the time I had gathered enough evidence, I was already prepared for the possibility of divorce. However, even after Kenneth found proof of infidelity, he continued with his married life. He said he continued the marriage because of the deep bond formed over the years they spent together. After the divorce, when Kenneth told me this, it reminded me of how I felt. When you spend years with someone, there's a point where you realize you're together more out of habit than love. If both parties communicate well during these times, it's probably not an issue. In reality, couples who've been together for years, or married couples who've been together for decades, communicate well. Kenneth and I just chose the wrong partners and couldn't manage that. Jack had a hard time with Shuji and Catherine, but in the end, the two were thrown out of their home. Having nowhere to go, they reluctantly ended up in a monthly apartment. It seems like Jack and Catherine were quite alike, often spending recklessly at convenience stores and buying unnecessary branded items. That's why they had hardly any savings when they were evicted. The reason I knew about their lack of savings is because they begged me to lend them money for the monthly apartment's rent. I had already divorced Jack and hadn't received any alimony from him, so I didn't lend him any money. So, if they could afford a monthly apartment, they must have borrowed money from relatives or acquaintances. However, monthly apartments have month-to-month contracts, so they'll have to leave after a month. Right now, people are keeping their distance from Jack. The reason is that I told everyone about what Jack did. Jack and I had been dating since our college days, so we had many mutual friends. Coincidentally, soon after our divorce, I was invited to a reunion. At the reunion, there were updates on everyone's lives, and I was asked about what I was doing now and how things were with Jack. I didn't think lying was right, and I had nothing to hide, so I honestly reported everything Jack and Catherine had done. Some classmates had lent money to Jack and were angry about the way he approached them. That guy always has an excuse for not paying back. I lent him $1,000 thinking of our old friendship. Guess I'll have to write that off. But I never imagined he'd do something so terrible to Natalie. I wish she had confided in us, one said, while also taking my side. Since then, my interaction with friends increased, and Jack lost his. Having no one left to borrow from, Jack began visiting supermarkets late at night, looking for half-priced ready-made meals. The reason I know this is because I ran into him at a supermarket just before closing. Jack kept walking back and forth in the deli section, waiting for the half-price stickers to be applied. Finally, when they did put half-price stickers on the meals, Jack headed to the cashier. But it seemed he didn't have enough money, even with the discount. "Can't you just discount it by a few cents? It's no big deal. If the cashier can't be flexible, I'm gonna complain," he shouted and stormed out of the store. I didn't want to bump into him, so I waited for a while before leaving. But even after 30 minutes, Jack was still outside the supermarket. There was someone there arguing with him. "Why couldn't you buy it? It's strange. I'm starving, and I haven't eaten anything today. Do something and get some food." The person arguing with Jack was Catherine. From their conversation, it seemed they were struggling even to eat that day. Trying not to be noticed, I pulled my hat down further and left the supermarket. After finalizing my divorce with Jack, I decided to re-enter the workforce. I was really surprised when I found a company willing to hire me on a contract basis at my age. I made up my mind to work hard to give back to this company. I had always thought I wasn't cut out for work, but as I tackled challenges head-on, I began to receive positive feedback. Most of my managers in the department are younger than me, but thanks to their thorough training, I can see my skills growing. Initially, I was just a contractor, but recently they approached me about becoming a full-time employee. With a full-time position, there'll be more opportunities and challenges. And naturally, I'll earn more money. I've been saving up since my single days, enough to afford a house. Now that I've divorced Jack, I don't plan on remarrying. So, I decided to buy a condo when I got the promotion. In the past, I bumped into Jack and Catherine at a local Walmart, so part of my reason for moving was to avoid running into them. If we live in the same area, we might bump into each other again. As of now, Jack hasn't tried to reconcile or asked for money, but you never know. Friends and family advised me to move as far away as possible. The new place is a bit far from work, but it's well connected, so I can easily go shopping downtown. The condo is just right for a single person like me, not too big, but spacious enough. Now, I'll have to work even harder to pay off my mortgage. But, after living there for about 6 months, I started to feel a bit lonely. I don't plan to remarry, and it's a bit too small for roommates. Just when I was pondering this, I found a stray kitten outside my apartment. I decided to watch it for a while, thinking its mother might show up. I thought the mother cat might show up and take the kitten away at some point, but the next day, the kitten was still in the same spot outside my apartment building, crying just like the day before. With winter approaching, I couldn't bear the thought of it freezing outside, so after consulting with my building manager, I decided to adopt it. The building allows pets, and as long as I take care of it, there's no issue. This playful kitten runs to me as soon as I get home. She's not picky with food and often snuggles into my bed during cold mornings. I wasn't particularly fond of cats before, but now I can't imagine life without her. I even show off her pictures at work, and I'm always talking about how she's the cutest. They say my child is the cutest, and I find myself oddly agreeing with that. I have a few friends who also have cats, so it's reassuring to know I can ask them for advice. These days, I look forward to coming home to my waiting cat. I live with my son, so you need to leave. Suddenly, my mother-in-law I'm living with threw those cold words at me. I thought I have always been good to my mother-in-law. I've always tried to make sure she didn't have any inconveniences, but it seems my mother-in-law never noticed. There have been times when my mother-in-law treated me poorly, and I have grown resentful of her. Finally, I was like, I'll gladly leave. I haven't intended to say that, but I thought that was probably how I truly felt. My husband is away on a business trip. The only one who'd be in trouble if I left would be my mother-in-law. The luxurious life she's been enjoying in the city is because of me. Had my mother-in-law forgotten that? With these thoughts, I've decided to leave the house. My name is Catherine. I'll be turning 38 this year. My husband and I have been married for 10 years, and we both work. We once considered having children, but the doctor told me it would be difficult for me to conceive. I was told natural conception was nearly impossible, and we considered fertility treatments. However, after many discussions, my husband and I decided not to have children and to enjoy our lives together. Then, my father-in-law got sick and passed away. My mother-in-law had bad knees and living alone in the family home was tough. We thought about hiring a caregiver, but for safety reasons, it seemed best if she lived with us. We were planning to build a house at that time, so we designed it with a room for my mother-in-law in mind. For her convenience, given my mother-in-law's bad knees, we installed a small bathroom, kitchen, and toilet on the first floor. On the second floor, we have our own bathroom and kitchen, thinking my mother-in-law would be comfortable. Though it went over our budget, we felt it was the best decision considering my mother-in-law comfort. It showed our consideration and kindness. But it seemed my mother-in-law didn't see it that way. I could tell from my mother-in-law's behavior since she started living with us. I never had a bad impression of her before, but recently she's become more aggressive toward me. Moreover, My mother-in-law always becomes more aggressive when my husband's not at home. My husband is in sales, and recently he's been traveling abroad more often. While he used to have day trips frequently, it's different with overseas trips. He often stays away for about a week per trip. That very day, my husband mentioned he'd be on an international business trip for about a week. After sending my husband off early in the morning, I began getting ready for work. Suddenly, I heard my mother-in-law's loud voice from downstairs. "Hey! Come down here right now." Wondering what the fuss was about, I quickly headed to the first floor, but everything looked normal. My mother-in-law was just sitting in the living room, watching TV. I had assumed there was some sort of emergency. Then she was like, "Why are you just standing there? Hurry up and make my breakfast." I had never prepared breakfast for my mother-in-law before, as my husband and I both have full-time jobs and she always made her own. I wondered what had changed. Maybe she wasn't feeling well? I suggested she might need to see a doctor, but she was like, "I'm perfectly fine. Can't you see? Shouldn't my son's wife take care of me?" I've heard other households serve a 3-course breakfast every morning. Turns out, the family she was referring to lives together just like us, but the wife is a homemaker. So, she prepares meals 3 times a day. I tried to explain that my husband and I both work, so it's impossible for me to cook in the mornings or midday, but my mother-in-law just turned the TV volume up in frustration. I figured she didn't want to hear what I had to say, so I decided not to say anything more. That day, after finishing work and returning home, I found my mother-in-law waiting for dinner. I made lasagna that my mother-in-law loves, but she was like, "What's this? It's way too salty," and threw all the food I prepared into the trash. After that incident, my mother-in-law became very domineering, constantly picking on me and nitpicking everything I did. When things got unbearable, I confided in a friend who suggested it might be bullying by mother-in-law. Upon researching online, I found numerous similar stories from other my mother-in-laws. As my mother-in-law's behavior continued to worsen, I decided to have a heart-to-heart conversation with her. I took a day off from work and approached her during the day. I was like, "Hey, why have you suddenly started acting so hostile? We've always lived in harmony. If I've done something wrong, let me know. But if you don't talk to me, I won't know how to make things right." However, she didn't seem interested in listening. When I patiently faced my mother-in-law, she eventually started to speak. Apparently, she had become envious after hearing about a family she'd talked about some time ago. In that family, there are 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and the couple lives with the husband's parents. Their home is more spacious than ours, and she's envious because they have coffee with many guests. She mentioned that she wished to spend her retirement in such a manner. Our home isn't necessarily small. In our neighborhood, it's actually considered quite large. We have a backyard big enough for barbecue parties, and I told her we could host home parties without any issues. But she felt inferior and believed she couldn't compete, hence not inviting anyone over. Our conversation didn't conclude with any resolution. However, a few days later, an incident occurred. As I was leaving for work, a lady from across the street was staring at me. Moreover, I noticed people whispering and glancing my way elsewhere. Wondering if there was something odd about my attire or makeup, I checked but found nothing amiss. I discovered the reason for the whispers that evening. On my way home from work, one of the neighbors approached me and said, "Hey, I've heard some rumors, violence ain't right." Violence? I was taken aback. Digging deeper, the rumor was that I had become violent with my mother-in-law. It was said that the confrontation took place on the day we had that discussion and that I even told her to leave if she continued with her lavish lifestyle. I have no memory of doing such a thing and had no intentions of ever doing so. After explaining, the lady thought for a moment and was like, "If that's true, it's really not good." The whole neighborhood's buzzing with this story. I've heard that she's been approaching others, wanting to discuss it and sharing stories of your alleged violence. For a while, I was labeled in the neighborhood as the violent wife. I managed to bear it until about 5 days after my husband left on a business trip. finally reaching my breaking point. I felt I needed to talk to my husband first, but I couldn't muster the courage to bother him with this during his busy trip. So, I decided to first communicate my feelings to my mother-in-law. "I've noticed you seem to have taken a disliking to me this past week. You're my husband's mother, and I wanted us to live comfortably together. No matter how hard I try, it seems I can't change how you feel. Perhaps it would be best if we consider living separately." My mother-in-law looked taken aback by my suggestion for a moment, but then she was like, "I agree. I never really liked you from the start. Living in this fancy house on my son's dime and acting as if you've done it all. A woman who doesn't even have kids and only works has little value in my eyes," and scoffed. At that point, I wondered what my mother-in-law was misunderstanding. Because, you see, I bought this house. From the down payment of the mortgage, everything's been on me. I had explained it when we built the house, but I wonder if my mother-in-law has forgotten. Moreover, I'm the one covering the living expenses. My mother-in-law gets an allowance from my husband and spends it carelessly, but that's also coming out of my salary. Even though my husband is working hard, he's not making as much as expected, and his income is lower compared to mine. So, the agreement was that we'd cover our living expenses from my income and save whatever my husband made, since we don't have kids and for our future. Before we moved in together, my husband had explained this to her, and he had warned her not to be wasteful. Ever since my husband left on his business trip, my mother-in-law has been watching TV infomercial every day and making phone calls. She probably ordered something. As I was thinking about all this, she started saying things like, she was like, "I'm gonna live here with my son. You should leave. I'll discuss the rest with my son. If my son wants, you might even consider a divorce. So, be prepared for that." At this point, I realized it's useless to argue. Once I gave up, I was like, "I'll gladly leave," quickly packed my largest suitcase, and decided to leave the house with all I could carry. Before leaving, I glanced at my mother-in-law, and she was smirking at me. She laughed aloud and was like, "Oh, leaving so soon? That's not too bad of you, but maybe you could be a bit more charming?" Honestly, I don't remember doing anything to upset my mother-in-law this much. Whenever my mother-in-law asked for a ride, I would provide one. I tried my best to spend time with her, so she wouldn't feel lonely. We haven't given her the joy of grandkids, and I work. However, that's the life choice we made as a couple, and my mother-in-law has no right to dictate that. As anger surged within me, I thought my mother-in-law'd be the one regretting this in the end. With that thought, I left the house with my heavy luggage. When told to leave, I wondered where I'd go. My childhood home is a plane ride away, and I couldn't abandon my job. Also, I didn't want to worry my parents. The first place that came to mind was my office. I run my own business, a small cafe. I employ 2 students as part-time, but primarily I manage it on my own. The cafe is in a 1-story house, with the extra space used as an office and storage. Though it's a small house, there's enough space for someone to live. I usually drove from home to the office, but living at the office would cut down the commute. Now, I won't need to cook for my mother-in-law anymore, which means more time for work. As someone passionate about my job, I got excited thinking about the extra working hours while setting up a living space in the office. I cleared out the piles of cardboard boxes and decided to sleep on the blanket I had laid out for napping. I also arranged a table and chairs to make work easier. By evening, 2 student part-timers came in for their shifts. They were surprised to see the office looking different, but once I explained the situation, they readily understood. They were even like, "Let us know if you need anything. We'll help out wherever we can." At that moment, I felt grateful for hiring them. They're such kind-hearted individuals, and they've received excellent feedback from our customers. I've been checking the reviews for our cafe daily, and besides the ambience and the quality of food, many patrons praise the service provided by the part-timers. I had been thinking about raising their pay when I received a call from my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip. I could only check the message around 9 p.m. My husband mentioned he got home earlier than expected. However, upon arriving, he noticed a lot of my belongings were missing. He confronted my mother-in-law. But my mother-in-law wouldn't spill the beans about my whereabouts. After pressing her for about an hour, she finally explained. My husband then realized I had left due to issues with my mother-in-law and quickly tried to contact me. There were several missed calls, but considering my husband didn't show up at my workplace, I appreciated his understanding of my situation. Feeling guilty about making him worry, I called him back. Without delay, my husband answered, asking what had happened. I was hesitant about whether to be honest about everything, but my husband's persistence made me spill the truth. I briefly explained what my mother-in-law had done to me, and I could tell from my husband's voice that he was furious. He wanted to talk as soon as I finished work. After locking up the cafe and office, I headed home. I had never seen my husband this mad before. Thus, the thought of meeting my husband in this state was intimidating. I reached home around 10 p.m. and noticed that only the lights on the first floor were on. My husband and my mother-in-law must be in the living room. When I tried to unlock the door, my key wouldn't fit. I knocked at the door, and my husband came out to unlock the door. As I entered the living room, there sat my mother-in-law with a sulky expression. Apparently, after I left, she had changed the locks without telling anyone. My husband hadn't noticed earlier since the door was unlocked when he got back from his trip. My husband immediately wanted to hear the whole story from me, so I told him about the incidents over the past week. I explained how my mother-in-law suddenly became overbearing, wouldn't listen during our talks, and went as far as spreading lies about me to the neighbors. Every time I pointed this out, she would accuse me of lying. However, when my husband insisted on hearing everything, she just went silent. After I finished speaking, it was my mother-in-law's turn. My mother-in-law claimed I was violent towards her and wouldn't stop, even when she asked me to. She mentioned she had talked with neighbors, but the harassment from me only seemed to increase. She even began to say that if the neighbors were asked, they would know all about my doings. I wondered what made my mother-in-law so confident to make such outrageous claims. The conversation seemed to be going in circles, and there was no clear conclusion. So, I decided to show something to my husband. I had been collecting video and audio footage. With just a few taps on my smartphone, I could record instantly, and over the past week, I had recorded every time my mother-in-law made snide remarks. Whenever I had the chance, I would prop up my phone to capture my mother-in-law harassing me on video. The footage showed my mother-in-law yelling at me to make dinner and even calling me defective for not having children. Seeing this, my husband was furious, his face turning bright red. On the contrary, my mother-in-law looked pale as if she had seen a ghost. In a desperate attempt to save face, she was like, "This isn't right, Catherine. It's just a misunderstanding. It seems like I'm the bad one, but that's because you cut out the parts where you were being mean. In reality, you've done much worse to me." But my husband, who had experience with video editing, wasn't convinced. If the video had been edited unnaturally, he would have noticed right away. It seemed like my husband completely trusted me. Just as I hoped, he began considering living separately from my mother-in-law. Despite my mother-in-law's vehement objections, my husband seemed firm in his decision. For the time being, I decided to stay at an office. During this period, we discussed whether to live separately and how to go about it if we decided to. Eventually, a conclusion was reached. We were going to send my mother-in-law to a nursing home. We had been against this idea before we moved in together. It seemed like a secure environment where she'd be looked after 24/7. However, my mother-in-law had always said she didn't want to go into a facility. I thought that if she did, it would be incredibly stressful for her. But, my husband revealed he had been considering this option for a while. With my mother-in-law's bad knee and both of us working, we just couldn't give her the attention she needed. He believed that the only way to ensure her safety was for her to be in a facility. However, my mother-in-law really pleaded not to be put in a facility, but my husband didn't budge. My husband isn't someone who shows it much, but he really adores me. I started dating him due to his relentless pursuit, and from the time we began our relationship to our marriage, things moved incredibly fast. After getting married, my husband was always helpful around the house and always seemed to put me first. So, I kind of saw it coming when he took my side over my mother-in-law's. My mother-in-law apparently hadn't noticed and assumed my husband would be on her side. But when she was told my mother-in-law'd be placed in a facility, she quickly apologized to me. However, my husband was still upset and didn't listen to anything my mother-in-law said. During all this, I was focusing on running my cafe. Initially open from lunchtime, I began opening it for breakfast and started serving alcohol in the evenings. To my surprise, the number of customers nearly doubled. I was so shocked by the huge response that I inadvertently shared the news with my mother-in-law. I was like, "Thanks to you kicking me out, the cafe is doing better than ever. Thanks for giving me this opportunity," but it seemed to come off as sarcasm to my mother-in-law. I'll never forget the look on my mother-in-law's face when I told her about the cafe's success. Her lips were tight and her eyes weren't smiling. In the end, we had my mother-in-law stay at the closest senior facility. Although the cost was higher compared to other places, it was known for its excellent services. Despite the past tensions, I never wished any ill on my mother-in-law. I'm actually thankful for her raising my husband to be the man he is. So when it came to choosing a facility for her, I wanted to find the best possible place. Being somewhat forced into the facility, I heard my mother-in-law was causing a lot of trouble there. Whenever I visited, I was told she had issues with other residents. The reasons for these disputes were minor things, like making eye contact or speaking too loudly. She often clashed with other residents, but fortunately, it never reached a point where they'd kick her out. They ended up isolating her from the others. The staff kept me updated about my mother-in-law's situation. Initially, my mother-in-law was quite spirited, but about 6 months into her stay, I was told she seemed to lose her energy. She probably felt lonely without talking to others. Recently, with the help of the staff, I received a report that she's now able to converse well with other residents. However, it seems my mother-in-law's nature hasn't changed, and due to her bad attitude, she was evicted from the facility. Although she moved to another facility, she ended up isolated and her loneliness seemed to intensify, possibly leading to dementia. It's a bit sad that she had to be separated from her son, my husband. Still, if it ensures everyone's peace, it might be for the best. Now, I live in Europe with my husband. My husband, who had been traveling abroad more frequently for work, recently said he wouldn't be able to return home for about a month. Then, he suggested he'd like to take me abroad with him. I run a cafe and thought I couldn't possibly leave, but luckily 2 of my student workers were graduating, so I decided to close the cafe and follow my husband. I dreamed of running a restaurant abroad and set off for Europe. At first, the language barrier was tough, and I mostly stayed home. But after making friends in the neighborhood, my perspective changed. A friend got me a job at the local grocery store, and gradually, I was able to communicate better. Eventually, I decided to open a small cafe in a corner of a town. We had a house back in Oregon which was still being mortgaged. We contemplated whether to sell it or not, but due to some false rumors in the neighborhood, we sold it to fund the new cafe. Thanks to the many acquaintances I'd made, a lot of people visited on the opening day. It was also promoted on social media as a homey cafe run by an American, and some customers even came all the way from the US. The reason I started the cafe was that I managed to get permanent residency in Europe. The reason my husband was traveling more was that he was getting more work opportunities abroad than in the US. My husband's company proposed relocating him to their branch in Europe, so we just ended up settling there. He eventually quit that job, but in his new job, he seems to be really shining. And is now earning about the same as I am. When we were like, we've settled down here in Europe, and with both of us, it's hard to figure out where to use our money. To our surprise, we found out we were expecting. We were told natural conception would be difficult, but it feels like a gift from above. Raising a child will be challenging, but I believe my husband and I will manage. We can't wait to meet our baby, even though the due date is a way off. The town I live in is filled with friendly folks, and when I shared the news of my pregnancy, everyone was genuinely thrilled for me. I believe that in this environment, our child will surely have a happy life. It wasn't a major accident, was it? I'm going on a trip now. So, take care of things there. When I heard my dad was hospitalized, I was taken aback. I had hoped my mother-in-law would come with me. But she left for her trip anyway. A week passed, and my mind was filled with these events, leaving my husband and I bewildered. Then, with no knowledge of what transpired, my mother-in-law came back with great energy. To her I said,
"Your husband's funeral is over."
She clutched her head, lost and confused by my words. My name is Catherine Turn. I'm turning 30 this year. I live with my husband Bob and my dad. I lost my mom at a young age, so my dad raised me, his only daughter. When getting married, I didn't want to leave my father alone. Bob happily agreed to this sentiment. Thanks to that, he came to live at my family home as a son-in-law. This year marks our 5th wedding anniversary. Hey Bob, let's go out for drinks this weekend. Found a great place. Is that so? Well, just don't drink too much, okay? If you get too drunk, it'll be hard for you to get home. Watching them talk and laugh together, there are moments they seem just like a real father and son. While Bob is a bit introverted, he's kind and friendly to everyone. My dad seems to appreciate that, which makes me happy. However, not everyone is happy about their bond. Enter my mother-in-law, Mary Matson. She seemed displeased that her precious son was living at his wife's family home. I can understand her feelings to some extent, but it was Bob's decision. Honestly, I wish she'd accept it. From the start of our marriage, whenever she visited, she never missed a chance to throw shade my way. Bob has married into your family, but he's still my son in every way that matters. No matter how many years pass, this line is always her opener. Then she continues with, "And remember, Catherine, you're not a guest when you're at your husband's family home. Help out with the chores." Saying this, she'd have me do everything from cleaning to cooking. But honestly, I never felt like I was just a visitor there. I carried out my duties without complaints, which probably annoyed her since she ran out of things to criticize. However, when it came to cooking, I'd always check in on how she preferred things. "Mary, how's the seasoning for the stew?" Without a word, she'd start adjusting it. Yet, she never missed an opportunity to critique. "This is nothing like our family's recipe. How could you make me taste this? Start over," she'd say, clearly displeased, and would then try to discard what I made. I always got angry at this behavior, but I could never speak up. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't know what she'd say next. Yet, in moments like these, my father-in-law would intervene. "Catherine put a lot of effort into that. How would you feel if someone tossed out your hard work? Well, it's not seasoned right. And it's too salty. Not good for our health." No matter how much he defended me, she wouldn't listen. I never intended to make the food overly salty. In fact, I often aimed for a lighter taste, adding more seasoning little by little. But she'd always find something to complain about. Bob sometimes stood up for me, but this only aggravated Mary more. "You don't need to say that much, Mom. You're going overboard. Mind your own business." Bob always got silenced like that by his mother. Yet later, he'd apologize, saying, "Sorry for not speaking up." I'd always smile and reply to Bob, "It's all right." I always felt that she was just bitter, thinking I stole her son away. So I believed she was just making life hard for me out of spite. Once I started thinking that way, I decided not to let her words get to me. And the fact that Bob and my father-in-law would stand up for me became my encouragement. But even though I tried not to let it affect me, if I kept hearing the same things every time I went to their house, it would still break my spirit. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. Even now, whenever I visit their house, she never fails to make snide comments at me. I've become good at brushing off most of what she says, so now her only remarks are about my cooking. She'd hint with a smile, suggesting she's about to start with her sarcasm. How do you even manage to season the food this way? Odd, isn't it? I cook just how you told me to. I'd retort, matching her tit for tat. After 5 years, I'm not the pushover I used to be. At the start of our marriage, I was more reserved and there were many things I wanted to say but didn't. But now, given my nature, I've been speaking up more. Not that it would make her back down, and her remarks towards me didn't cease. In fact, they became even worse. One day, she surprisingly praised my cooking. "Oh, it turned out quite decent today. But there's still room for improvement." I was puzzled by her comment, yet took it as rare praise. That's when Bob intervened. "Actually, it's always good." Seeing her reaction to his words, she was visibly upset. And then, as always, the snarky comments began. "Don't get ahead of yourself just because I complimented you. I haven't changed anything. I made it how you said. I'm actually grateful for your advice." She gave a grimace and then spoke. "Oh, scary. Young wives these days talk back a lot." And with that, she left the room. Lately, I've not only been talking back but also not feeling as affected by her words. But there was one topic that always got to me. The fact that we didn't have kids even after 5 years of marriage. Whenever she ran out of comebacks, she'd always bring that up. I've been wanting to see my grandchild, but it seems that's still far off. When will that be? I'd be at a loss for words against such comments. Indeed, not having children after 5 years does bring concerns. But I believe the more you rush things, the harder they get. So even though I try not to let it affect me, it still hurts when she brings it up. It was becoming a real source of stress for me. Then one day, she called me out of the blue. "Mary, what's the urgency?" I was puzzled by the sudden call. Then, the mother-in-law responded with a gleeful look on her face. "Oh, didn't I tell you? I'm going on a trip with my friends. I've been planning this for a while. I'll be back in about a week. Please take care of the house." I was shocked, as I hadn't heard anything about a trip. But then I realized something and asked. "It looks like you've packed only for yourself. Isn't your husband going?" "He's staying home. I'm going with my friends. Why would I bring him? So please take care of him." That's unexpected. Just as I was about to retort, my phone rang. However, I didn't recognize the number, so I initially ignored it, but the calls kept coming. Suspicious, I decided to answer. To my surprise, it was a police officer. "Is this Mrs. Catherine Turn's phone?" "Yes, it is." Wondering why the police were calling, I answered the question. Then I was told a shocking truth. Apparently, my father had been in a serious car accident and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I was even told he was unconscious. No way, my dad. Overwhelmed by shock, I crouched down right where I was. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Seeing me like that, my mother-in-law spoke up. "What happened all of a sudden?" "My dad's been in a car accident and was taken by ambulance." As I responded through my tears, she unexpectedly said, "Oh, that's all?" "What do you mean, that's all? They said he's unconscious. Can't you come with me? I feel so alone right now." I begged desperately, but she frowned and replied, "I can't do that. It's probably not a big deal anyway. Besides, I gotta go on a trip now. You handle your stuff on your own. Take care of everything, okay?" "I can't believe." I tried to plead again, but she grabbed her bags and left the house. I thought, what if something happens to my dad? What should I do now? Then my father-in-law gently put his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, "Let's go to the hospital first. I'll be there with you." Seeing the kind smile on his face, I felt relieved. So, together with him, I headed to the hospital. Once we arrived and were guided to my father's room, tears once again welled up in my eyes. After a while, Bob also rushed to the hospital. Instead of the distraught me, my father-in-law explained the situation, even mentioning my mother-in-law's trip.
Catherine, don't worry about anything now. Stay by your dad's side. I can manage things at home by myself. Don't stress out. Thank you so much.
I managed to say, overwhelmed with gratitude. And so, I kept a sleepless vigil by my unresponsive father's side. A week went by, and after dinner, Bob and I quietly drank some tea. Our minds were full, trying to process the events of the past few days. Then, unaware of our state, my mother-in-law came home cheerfully.
I'm back. Sorry for being so late. I planned to be home earlier, but there was a lot of traffic.
She spoke gleefully, but Bob and I remained silent, looking down. Still, she continued.
The spa trip was so fun. Oh, and I got souvenirs for both of you.
My cheerful mother-in-law didn't notice our mood, and it seemed like she wouldn't stop talking anytime soon.
Well, I went to the beach, and the ocean looked so beautiful from the room. But the sea itself was also beautiful. It was really nice. We should all go together next time.
However, noticing something was off, she looked around with a puzzled expression. Speaking of which, where's my husband? The house was locked, so I thought he was here.
Dad's not here. I have the keys.
Bob finally responded to the mother-in-law's query, though he looked tense.
Why do you have the house keys, Bob?
The mother-in-law asked, appearing clueless. With a straight face, Bob replied.
It's hard to explain here. Let's go home and talk.
Saying this, Bob picked up the car keys and his mother-in-law's luggage and headed to the car. I nodded in agreement with Bob's words, followed him without saying anything else. Unaware of our heavy mood, the mother-in-law was still in high spirits. And perhaps still in a holiday mood, she continued to chat happily in the car.
The food was amazing since we were by the sea. Most of it was seafood, but the sashimi was particularly delicious. There were so many fresh fish, I wanted you guys to see it.
She continued talking non-stop all the way to the house. A trip that took less than 30 minutes by car. But listening to her in silence was tough. But I couldn't stop the mother-in-law who was talking so joyfully. No, that's not it. I just didn't have the energy. Then, equally silent till now, an annoyed Bob finally spoke up.
Mom, can you keep it down a bit?
I'm trying to drive here. Hearing Bob's words, she pouted like a child and began to talk back.
What?
I'm just trying to keep the mood light since you're driving in the dark.
Catherine isn't saying anything either. What's wrong with enjoying a drive?
Hearing her response, I was left speechless out of exasperation. Bob, probably feeling the same way, let out a deep sigh. However, unable to bear it any longer, he shouted.
Mom, just be quiet. I don't want to hear your stories right now.
The mother-in-law looked genuinely shocked at Bob's tone. And then, with a puzzled look on her face, she began to speak.
Why are you so angry? Just trying to concentrate on driving. Please, just be quiet for now.
Perhaps understanding, the mother-in-law finally fell silent. We then spent the rest of the trip in silence. A few minutes later, we finally arrived at the family home. And as Bob unlocked the front door, he entered the house.
I'm home. It feels good to be back. There's no place like home.
The mother-in-law said, relieved, as soon as she entered the house. But when the lights turned on, she noticed something was amiss. She quietly began to speak.
Wait, where is he? He wasn't at your place either.
Saying this, she called out for her husband multiple times. But there was no response, and the mother-in-law came up with an optimistic theory.
He's probably mad because I went on the trip without consulting him. He must have gone on a solo trip out of anger. That's why you guys couldn't tell me, right?
I was growing tired of her cheerful assumptions. And I wondered how she could come up with such ideas. At that point, an exasperated Bob responded.
Dad went on a long trip by himself.
See? When's he coming back? She asked Bob without a hint of doubt in her voice. I couldn't stay silent any longer and tried to steady myself before speaking.
He's not coming back.
What do you mean? Is he that mad? Realizing she still didn't grasp the situation, I led her to a specific room. As she entered, she stood in shock and disbelief.
Is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke. We've already held Dad's funeral.
The mother-in-law, now grasping the gravity of the situation, asked what had happened.
He was in a car accident,
I replied, tears forming in my eyes. At Bob's words, my mother-in-law began to recall and speak.
There was that car accident. Remember?
Catherine's dad was rushed to the hospital.
And on that day, wasn't your father here too? After that, my dad woke up. He's still hospitalized, though.
Hearing my words, my mother-in-law seemed lost and held her head, saying she didn't understand. I then explained what happened afterward. On the day my dad was taken to the hospital, my father-in-law accompanied him. I was by my unconscious father's side, taking care of him all the time. Concerned about my father and me, my father-in-law visited us daily. And a few days later, when my dad finally woke up, both my father-in-law and I were overjoyed. We had plans to go out for drinks once he was discharged. But then, on our way back, I tried to speak calmly, but I was overwhelmed with emotion and couldn't continue. Bob took over for me.
Dad was apparently taken to the same hospital as Catherine's father. Catherine saw him being brought in by ambulance by chance and let me know. I rushed there immediately, but it was already too late.
Why did that happen?
My mother-in-law, taken aback by our story, seemed lost for words. However, a visibly distressed Bob quickly changed his demeanor and spoke up.
What were you doing all that time, Mom? I tried contacting you multiple times. I had no idea things had gotten this bad.
My mother-in-law looked baffled by Bob's questioning. Seeing her like this, Bob's expression remained unchanged.
We get it. No one expected this to happen.
That's right, isn't it? We're all in the same boat, right?
But as my mother-in-law tried to reason, Bob stared her down.
Then tell me, why was your cell phone off?
What? I mean.
Hearing Bob's words, the mother-in-law turned pale. Yet, undeterred by her reaction, Bob continued speaking.
I kept calling, but your phone was always off. And when I finally thought I got through, no answer. You didn't even call back. What's that about?
My mother-in-law was at a loss for words. And she stayed silent. But Bob wasn't finished.
Why didn't you tell us you were going on a trip in advance? Who were you planning to go with? At least tell us where you're headed. Sure, you're an adult and don't need to tell us everything, but we would have liked to know, especially given what happened.
Bob shared our feelings on the matter. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law responded.
I went on a trip with a friend.
But as far as I know, I contacted all your friends. None of them were with you. They even said they didn't know where you went.
Bob kept pressing for answers.
I've made new friends recently. Ones you don't know about.
She seemed determined to counter Bob's accusations. But Bob wasn't backing down.
Is this him?
Bob asked, showing her a photo of a man walking arm in arm with my mother-in-law. Seeing the picture, her face went pale.
He's just a drinking buddy. Not the one I traveled with.
Bob replied with a meaningful tone.
Seems like you're quite close for just a drinking buddy.
There's nothing between us. Sure, we're close, but not in the way you're implying.
Why the act? You think we don't know? Even my dad knew.
Unable to hold back his frustration with his evasive mother, Bob finally raised his voice.
Do you still deny anything with him, even after seeing this?
Bob thrust another photo at her, showing the two of them entering a hotel. The sight made her shiver.
Why do you have this?
It seemed that my mother-in-law realized she couldn't deny it any longer and timidly asked.
I found a diary when I was going through Dad's belongings. It was inside.
Bob calmly began to explain. He told her about the diary and how it mentioned the person in the photograph. His dad had known for quite some time that his wife had been having an affair but never confronted her. In fact, the diary even mentioned that he felt he was the one to blame.
Dad's diary didn't blame you or say a single bad thing about you.
Bob said.
I'm so sorry. I did go on a trip with him. I never thought it would lead to this. I'm truly, truly sorry.
She apologized with tears in her eyes after understanding the gravity of her actions.
I'm sorry to both of you. Please forgive me. I won't ever see him again and I'll change my ways.
The mother-in-law pleaded while crying. However, Bob replied firmly.
Even if Dad forgave you, I will never.
Hearing this, the mother-in-law collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Yet, we left her there and exited the house. Later, Bob told us about a local bar that was mentioned in his father's diary. He went there and discreetly asked around. Apparently, the mother-in-law hadn't been meeting with the man she traveled with. They had both been hiding the fact that they were married and decided to part ways without any arguments. However, neighbors and friends found out about her affair and the fact she skipped her husband's funeral for a romantic getaway. They shunned her, and this hurt led her to sell her house and move away. On my end, I still struggled to cope with my father-in-law's passing. But my spirits were lifted when my dad got discharged from the hospital. We reminisce about my father-in-law almost daily.
I'm gonna go out for a drink soon. I had promised Bob's dad we'd have a drink together after he got better, so I'll bring his photo along.
My dad said cheerfully. Please ensure you're fully healed before you go out. We don't want you sleeping just anywhere. Bob responded with concern.
Nah, I'm fine. I'm not gonna sleep just anywhere with Bob's dad's photo.
He chuckled, not taking my plea seriously. Yet, he looked genuinely happy. To be honest, I hadn't found much to smile about since my father-in-law passed away. But lately, I've found myself laughing a bit more. Probably due to these light-hearted conversations. There's another piece of joyous news too. I'm pregnant. And as I want my father-in-law to rest in peace, I aim to regain my happiness bit by bit. I can't remain sad forever, especially now that I have a child on the way. At the airport, getting ready for our honeymoon, I pulled out the ticket holder from my bag, following my husband's instructions. That's when it happened. My husband snatched the plane ticket from my hand and threw these words at me.
You're not worth it. I should have gone with someone else.
He then ran towards another woman. Watching him, a secret smile crept onto my lips, and I took out my phone.
Well, time to go as planned.
My name is Michelle Anderson. Ever since I graduated from college, I've been working at a trading company in New York, now 30 years old. My husband of the same age, John, is a journalist registered with a publishing house. We met in the same college seminar. Back then, I wasn't particularly ambitious about my future job, but John, with his dreams, pursuing job opportunities, seemed radiant. He always said he wanted to be a reporter, chasing stories for newspapers or magazines. He definitely had a spark in him. Seeing each other often in the same seminar, our conversations grew more frequent over the course of 2 years. By the time graduation approached, I didn't want to part ways, so under his proactive approach, we started dating. We lived together for 3 years after graduation. Then, at 27, we made it official. However, we didn't have a wedding ceremony, reception, or even a honeymoon. Both our parents weren't thrilled about it, but while it was easy for me to get extended time off, John, who always prioritized his work, especially during incidents, couldn't do the same.
What about life's milestones? What if something happens to one of your family members all of a sudden? Would you say the same?
Even when I said that.
What are you talking about? Funerals are one thing, but weddings are a matter of personal choice. The stories I'm chasing right now can't wait.
I couldn't argue with that. After all, John's job was relentless, around the clock. I remember how ecstatic he was the year before we got married, as he finally got assigned to the editorial department of the weekly magazine he'd always wanted to work for. Now, he's busier than ever, working day and night. Well, not just now. Even before we lived together, his apartment was a mess, only coming home to sleep. One of the reasons we started living together was that I got tired of cleaning up his place every weekend. I was the one who chose and signed the lease for our new apartment. Except for sharing his preferences for location, rent, and size, he didn't do much else. We split the rent and living expenses. He sometimes forgot to pitch in. I took care of the cleaning and laundry. Even though we lived together, we rarely saw each other. The main reason for our official union was my desire to hold on to him, even if it was just a formality. For John, perhaps a wedding ceremony seemed unnecessary. But for me, even if it was just symbolic, I wanted a commemoration, a milestone. At the very least, I suggested we should take some photos and go on a short honeymoon nearby. But all I got in return was,
"Why just take pictures? If you want to go on a trip, why not go with your friends? I ain't got time for that."
Many of my college friends who were in the same seminar would say, "That's not right." But those who knew about his job often replied, "It can't be helped." 3 years have passed. We're now 30. Even though I want to discuss having children, John and I often have opposite schedules, making it hard to find the right moment. All I do is rush between work and household chores every day. I started wondering, why did we even get married? But then one day, John said this out of the blue.
"Hey Michelle, didn't you mention wanting to go on a honeymoon before?" "Yeah, but aren't you too busy?" "Nah, looks like I might get some decent time off. We can go if you want." "Really?" "I'll set the duration, you choose the rest."
His tone did bother me, but I still noted down the dates he mentioned. A week's time. And it's gonna be summer. So I thought maybe a cooler place would be good, so I considered going to Alaska. I went to the bookstore, picked up a few travel guides, marked places I wanted to visit, and showed them to John.
"Hey, can you look at this? I want to go here."
Before I could ask him where he wanted to go, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand.
You choose. I'm fine with anything."
Oh, okay. Something felt off to me then. Maybe it's unfair to expect much from John with his busy daily life. But this is supposed to be our honeymoon. Our very first milestone. I wanted to discuss and decide the destinations with him. Is it wrong for me to hope for that? Even though we've lived together for years, our lives barely intersect. When was the last time we had a meal together? I realized that we hardly ever spoke to each other. Even when I initiate a conversation, he often responds with phrases like "do whatever you want" and "I might let you handle it if you insist." Come to think of it, that's how he's been about chores as well. I remember John, back in college, saying something like this to everyone.
"In today's age, couples should both earn and equally share household chores. Splitting chores is just fair. You sure you can handle that? I can cook, at least."
I was quite impressed at the time. He wasn't wrong. Although he mostly eats out, occasionally he seems to cook for himself. I often find dishes I didn't use in the sink. But all other chores are on me. I always end up cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, taking out the trash, everything. Now, John rarely comes home at the same time I do. Once in a blue moon, we get to have dinner together, and it's a relief. But even then, he's constantly glancing at his phone on the table. Once dinner's over, he quickly moves to the living room, seemingly messaging someone on social media. All the while, I'm busy cleaning up. One day, slightly irritated by his indifference, I commented, "You seem awfully busy texting."
"Well, unlike you, I have work contacts to keep up with."
He probably wasn't wrong. By the way, he often leaves his smartphone unattended. Like when he's taking a bath or napping on the living room couch. It was by pure chance that I peeked into it. He was messaging a woman.
Who is this person?
At that moment, I shoved my smartphone screen in front of a groggy, just awakened John. The name on the screen read Anna Johnson. Multiple messages from John's side lined up, reading things like "Have you been? And you okay since then?"
Who? Oh, she's related to the case I'm currently working on. Is there a problem? You're texting someone related to the case every single day? Well, if I have questions, I've got to show some sincerity, right? But doesn't she seem annoyed by it? You have a problem with how I do my job?
I couldn't really argue when he brought up work.
But decide soon where we're going. I might not be back until the last minute because of the case I'm investigating. Pack our bags, will you?
Yes, that had just happened recently. And finally, the day of our trip arrived. John, who said he might not make it home in time, surprisingly woke up early and in high spirits. "Then, I'm gonna make breakfast," he said, placing a plate of toast, bacon and eggs, and a salad in front of me. I became suspicious when he also set down a pot of coffee, as it was so unlike him.
What's with that look? When I decide to do something, I do it.
Sure, it was just store-bought potato salad, undercooked bacon, and instant soup, but there was no need to make it seem so special. I kept those thoughts to myself and quietly ate.
Here, your luggage. Thanks, looks like you packed it well. Aren't you gonna check inside? I'll check later. If you say so.
We headed straight for the airport. By the way, our destination written on the tickets was Alaska. We had plans to travel around different parts of the state. We took the tram to the domestic terminal and headed for the boarding gate. As we were approaching, John suddenly stopped in his tracks.
Hey, have your boarding pass ready? I can get it out quickly.
As I began to pull out the ticket holder, he snatched the tickets from me, saying, "What a waste to travel with you. I should go with someone else." With that, he ran towards the boarding gate. There was a woman standing ahead. "That's Anna Johnson." He had a picture in his smartphone. "That's definitely her." I caught a glimpse of that, smirked discreetly, and took out my own smartphone.
Well, shall we head out as planned?
A few hours later, I was at the terminal building of an airport in Alaska. Headed straight for the domestic exit, right up to the famous pastry shop in the dessert corner on the second floor. I knew John and Anna were at the eat-in space there. I confidently walked in and approached the two of them who were enjoying an airport-exclusive sundae.
Found ya.
John, who had been gazing dreamily at Anna, suddenly paled, a bit of ice cream still on the corner of his mouth, looking at me as if he'd seen a ghost.
Wait. Why are you here, Michelle?
Anna jumped up and threw herself at me.
Michelle, I've been so scared.
I gently rubbed her trembling back, while giving John a stern look.
What do you mean? Why am I here? Do you know how many flights from different airlines land there? I just took the earliest one. Are you really a journalist? Not even knowing something so basic. Ugh. Exactly. How can you not even realize that, John? What kind of journalist are you?
From behind me, a deep male voice slowly approached, making John look even more tense.
Why? Why is the editor here? Let's not make a scene here. Let's step outside.
The man called editor was Mr. Long, the chief editor of my husband's department. When we got married, he and his wife had invited us to dinner as a celebration. At that time, we exchanged numbers just in case. As the charismatic Mr. Long grabbed his arm, John shivered. Anna, walking beside me, intertwined her arm with mine, while John looked on, completely baffled. Every time he tried to get closer to Anna, Mr. Long would firmly hold back John's hand. We pretended not to notice as John clicked his tongue in annoyance.
It's less crowded over here.
We headed towards a special room on the third floor we had reserved earlier. A man already inside stood up and waved at us.
Hey, over here!
John's expression turned to shock and he stopped in his tracks.
Come on, why are you stopping? Wait, Michelle, why is my dad there?
Well, you left me behind, so I just invited everyone. Why not make it a family trip? That's right. It's your fault for thinking you could go on a honeymoon with another woman.
Mr. Long started dragging John.
It's okay.
I whispered to Anna, and she nodded.
Sorry for the wait, mother and father-in-law. We've managed to capture John. Capture? Exactly, a man who thinks of going on a honeymoon with another woman should be captured, don't you think? Even you, Mom? And you used Michelle's money for all this, didn't you? Father-in-law?
Yes, it wasn't just the in-laws. My parents were there too. And another man, in a suit with glasses.
So, is this the young lady in question? Who are you? Sorry for the late introduction. I am.
He handed a business card to John.
A lawyer? Why?
In fact, I received a request from both Michelle and Anna here, John said.
Michelle did? Wait, more importantly, Anna, why on earth?
John reached out to her as he said this. However, his hand missed as Anna dodged it.
Stop it. Anna? I'm sorry, Anna. I managed to get her out here with your help, but it seems that was my limit. No, I'm sorry. If this settles everything. Settles? What are you talking about? You've been following Anna around for a while, haven't you? You're saying I've been stalking her? Is that not the case? It's not. I spoke to Anna about the incident that happened the other day. So after that was over, you kept in touch even though the article was done? For stories like this, you're supposed to keep in touch with the people involved.
Mr. Long slapped John on the head from above.
I apologize, Ms. Johnson. I told him not to publish any more articles about the incident you were involved in. Yes, I thought so. Look at the messages this man has been sending me.
The lawyer handed out printouts of the messages to everyone.
What is this? Thank you for your cooperation. Would you like to grab dinner sometime? And you kept inviting her long after she declined. I mean, it's just common courtesy. I was drawn to your brave attitude. What's this about? She truly was brave. Despite the incident, she tried so hard to recover. John.
The voice of John's father-in-law boomed.
What on earth are you saying? Drawn to her? Ms. Johnson, I won't ask about what happened, but I know you were hurt. Yet, it seems this fool kept reminding you of it when you were trying to forget.
Anna nodded with tears in her eyes. I only cooperated because he promised to write properly about the incident. Yet, he kept coming up with reasons to ask me out afterward. And the volume of messages too. And he knows where I live.
That's right. There's also this.
The lawyer handed out several pictures. They showed John with a camera next to a window of a 2-story apartment complex. It's the apartment I live in.
You were up to this?
Hearing that, Anna shivered again.
I've made up my mind.
I'm gonna report him for stalking.
What are you talking about?
Anna began to speak as if a dam had broken.
Every single day, he asks, "What are you doing? Can we meet tomorrow?" Even though he's heard about the incident, he persists even after I tell him there's nothing more to discuss. But you replied to my texts, didn't you? Who do you think is enjoying this conversation? Exactly. Thanks for today, how've you been? Yeah. You know what's good when you're tired? A massage. I'll come over and give you one sometime. I'm busy now. Stuff like that. And what's with the creepy "are you in the bath" messages?
I chuckled as I flipped through the thick printout.
Yes, I really appreciate everything Michelle did. She advised me to keep records of everything. Oh, come on. It must have been scary, right? To deal with someone spouting nonsense like that. It was terrifying.
Anna shivered.
How could you think from those messages that I was into you? It was just plain creepy. But about our trip. It was a final blow for you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered with this terrifying plan.
terrifying plan? You still don't get it?
I sighed deeply.
That was my name on it, right? Huh?
He probably realized it was about the airline ticket. Oh, right, it was. What about it? Mr. Long spoke in a hushed tone.
You know, if that's found, it's a crime. Exactly. And if someone gets caught, it won't be you. It's her.
He gasped. He truly seemed unaware. Mr. Long put his head in his hands. I can't believe how stupid my subordinate has been.
You too? Shut up. You're gonna use this to fly to the Philippines.
With that, Mr. Long shoved the ticket in John's face.
What? Why? There are various matters to investigate over there now. You can refuse if you want, but if you do.
Mr. Long turned to Anna.
Yes. If you decide to stay in the country, I'll report you to the police for stalking. I get it. But I don't have my luggage, my passport. The passport. Here.
It was my turn to hand it over to him.
Oh, right. There's something important. Sign this before you go.
I handed him the divorce papers with my signature.
Divorce papers? Are you abandoning me too? Oh, what are you saying to the wife who went to such lengths to prevent you from getting a criminal record? I'm the one who runs our home.
I laughed dramatically. But then I changed my expression.
Do you have any idea how much of a proper married life we had in that house? We hardly ever saw each other. Both working full-time, and yet all the housework falls on me. Plus, you haven't been contributing to our shared living expenses or rent recently. Really? I get paid just fine from my job. I know. I've looked into what you've been spending it on. Like those high-end cameras at this apartment. Just sign it.
Seeing my fury, his face turned pale as a ghost. He shakily signed the papers and handed them back.
All right, the rest is up to you.
Sorry for everything, said Mr. Long as he escorted John towards the international flight counter. We chose to settle on the third floor instead of the spacious lounge on the second floor. Why? Because the third floor of this airport is where the international terminal is located. The plan was to easily get him on a flight to Manila. As for what happens to him next, that's none of our business. After that, I moved from the condo I had been living in to a small apartment meant for living alone. The number of rooms decreased, and there's nothing unrelated to me. No more buying groceries for someone who I don't know when they'll be back. How easy house chores are when it's just for myself. I realized just how much unnecessary struggle I've been through while living with John. The moving expenses were covered by my father-in-law. He also settled the living expenses and rent John forgot to pay. My in-laws, lamenting that they raised their son wrong, were such kind folks. About a month later, I got a call from Mr. Long. Apparently, John got caught up in some trouble overseas and got arrested. Was it some kind of crime?
I really don't know. Our editorial department didn't ask him to get involved in any crimes or anything. Just told him to send daily updates on the situation over there. Well, I've heard various stories like he got deceived or got addicted to gambling. Told him if he could get a big scoop, we might let him return.
Seems like John got too ambitious and ruined himself, Mr. Long indirectly implied to me. Since then, I haven't heard any rumors of him coming back.
Michelle, over here.
At the cafe we had arranged to meet, Anna signaled me. I quickly approached her table.
Sorry for the wait. All set? Absolutely. How about you, Michelle? Look.
I showed her the fan merchandise for the concert we were going to. We shared a cheerful smile, had a quick coffee, and then headed for the venue. During the time I was communicating about John's issue, I found out that Anna and I were fans of the same musician and we hit it off. We had promised to attend a concert together once everything was settled. Today was the long-awaited day. After getting married, I had forgotten such joys amidst the conflicting schedules with John. Now, I can spend time just for myself, with friends sharing the same hobby. Oh, I'm truly glad I made that decision back then.